So there is the background, and now for more on ISIL-linked attacks worldwide and the continued threats that they pose, I'm joined by Kamran Bokhari. He is a Middle East and Southeast Asia specialist. He teaches courses on national security and foreign policy at the University of Ottawa. Well, as Andy mentioned in his report, the last major militant attack in Jakarta, that was back in 2009. Why do you think we're seeing an ISIL attack now in the capital, and what do we read into this?
Well, there are a number of things to note here, Mike. Number one is that it seems that the old networks that existed in Indonesia and were loosely or tightly affiliated with Al-Qaeda have now moved over to ISIL, ISIS. And from ISIS's point of view, it's demonstrating that it has global reach. We were expecting another attack in Europe or North America after the Paris attacks and the one in California. But this time, ISIS is using the element of surprise to strike in Indonesia, where people were not really expecting. Of course, the Indonesian security forces have been on the lookout, but nonetheless, this does come as a surprise.
What about those security forces in this response? Clearly, any loss of life is terrible, but limiting this to 2 victims, given what might have been considered at the time of the attack, the location, pretty impressive just to limit it to just 2, wouldn't you say?
It is, but the details are still trickling in, and so it may even be a combination of good performance by the security forces and bad tradecraft on the part of the terrorists. So things are still not very clear, but they will be as we move forward.
What about Jakarta? You heard Andy say Southeast Asia. It's a worrying signal, such a large Muslim population there. Why do you think it's being targeted?
I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that ISIS is trying to demonstrate, as I said, global reach. And then, of course, it's the ability to have assets. So they did have assets that they could, operationalize and mobilize and strike. So it's not as if they can just pick and choose targets around the world. They have to have assets in place. They have to have material and human resources to be able to pull off these dastardly attacks.
The images are pretty frightening, and we just set the table by describing how attacks have been carried out all over the world. They're getting a lot of attention, but earlier this week, U.S. President Obama in his State of the Union address indicated that we need to keep things in perspective. I want you to listen to what he had to say.
As we focus on destroying ISIL, over-the-top claims that this is World War III just play into their hands. Masses of fighters on the back of pickup trucks, twisted souls plotting in apartments or garages, they pose an enormous danger to civilians. They have to be stopped. But they do not threaten our national existence.
So I'd like to get your reaction to that. You think he's right?
I do think he's right. I mean, ISIS is a threat in the region and across of course, the threat varies based on geography. The threat is the highest in Syria and Iraq. And as you move away from this core turf in both directions, the threat reduces by so much. So I think that the president is right. But nonetheless, we can't allow these people to consolidate themselves in Syria and Iraq. And unfortunately, no international actor is really fighting ISIS in a concerted way. Geopolitics and other imperatives are coming in the way.
Do you think that the focus on these attacks, I mean, we're talking about Jakarta, Paris, Istanbul, that perhaps the attention's being diverted away, that it should be more focused, as you're saying, in really going after them in Syria and Iraq?
Indeed. I mean, the question at the end is, we need boots on the ground, and the question is, whose boots on the ground? The United States' policy is to allow the regional actors to step up. Now, if there is one force in that region that can actually do the job, it is the Turkish military. And I think that the Turks, whether they like it or not, whether they want it or not, irrespective of their subjective views, they're going to be drawn into Syria and, down the line. It may take months, it may take years, but eventually, if there is a force that is going to destroy or degrade or both ISIS, it's going to be the Turkish military.
Just getting back to Jakarta and Istanbul, what about these larger cities and the vulnerabilities? We saw it in Paris as well. There was a headline in one U.S. publication following the Paris attack saying that the Islamic State group has successfully thwarted the Western system of security. Are these major cities just enormously vulnerable and we just have to live with that?
I mean, the world at large presents itself as a target-rich environment for ISIS and for other terrorist groups like that. I mean, there's just no way we can lock down every, nook and cranny of the world, especially in big urban metropolitan areas. And so, we're going to have to live with it. This is the new normal until we are able to destroy the infrastructure that is pulling off these attacks, and that requires sophisticated intelligence, and political will, and cooperation amongst the various stakeholders. The United States or the Europeans or even regional powers like Turkey can't do it alone.
Kamran Bokhari with analysis from Toronto. Thanks so much.